man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Before we proceed, this video contains spoilers for the story. If you care about that sort of thing, I advise you to click away. Otherwise, let's jump right into it. The 7 Archons in Genshin Impact are some of the most important characters in the story. They are gods that emerged victorious in the Archon War, a war fought by gods where the victors were granted a gnosis by the heavens, which greatly enhanced their abilities and directly connects them to Celestia. Let's take a look at one of them today. As his epithet states, this Archon's main theme is freedom. In stories, freedom can be interpreted in many different ways. So, what kind of freedom does Barbatos represent? To understand this, let's have a history lesson. 2,600 years ago, Barbatos was not known by this name. In fact, he had no name at all, being a tiny little wind spirit. During this time, Old Mondstadt was ruled by the god of storms, Decarabian, who had protected his city from the cold, harsh weather of the region by creating a giant wind barrier over the city. However, as good as the barrier was for keeping the weather out, it was also keeping the people in. The people of this time revolted, led by a young nameless bard and our little wind spirit, among some other important names, and successfully fell Decarabian, unfortunately at the cost of this nameless bard's life. Now that the wind barrier is gone, the snow-covered lands of the region proved to be a difficult obstacle to overcome. As time went on, this wind spirit gained the faith of the people around it and managed to rise in power, becoming a god and taking on the form of his late friend, the nameless bard. He used his newfound godly abilities to blow all of the snow from Mondstadt off the face of the continent, making sea levels rise to the point where even an intimidating mountain like Pylo's Peak became nothing more than a reef out in the ocean. After New Mondstadt was established in Cider Lake, Barbatos would continue to be the local god until the end of the Archon War 600 years later. Mondstadt was finally in a time of peace. He established the city as the City of Freedom and refused to directly rule it, vanishing from everyone's sight soon after. He would return 400 years later to find that Mondstadt was being ruled by a corrupt and oppressive aristocracy at the hands of the Lawrence clan. Just like last time, Barbatos would team up with a person, this time a slave named Vanessa, to rebel against the aristocracy, ushering a new era of peace. Vanessa would go on to form the Knights of Favonius to govern the city, and Barbatos once again departed from the land. We don't know much of what happened afterwards, but 1,100 years later, the world-shattering cataclysm occurred, and a dark dragon named Durin would attack Mondstadt. Barbatos, along with the dragon Dvalin, managed to defeat it. The next time we hear of Barbatos is 500 years after the cataclysm, during the main events of the game. Everyone caught up now? As we can observe from his history, Barbatos isn't exactly a present god. Oftentimes he'd only appear during times of great danger, but never when his city is at peace. Then you might be asking, what is he doing during those off times? This is where Venti comes in, a traveling bard in green that sings tales of heroes, jauntily playing his lyre and flute. This is Barbatos' mortal disguise, a form which he uses to interact with the people around him. He tends to be short on the monetary side, seeing as he has no job, forcing him to play songs in exchange for food and drink. He's also a major alcoholic, choosing to spend whatever little money he has on wine rather than anything else. Venti is the prime example of a self-indulgent human being. Well, God in disguise. He isn't concerned with actively helping those in need, can't be bothered figuring out laws to govern the city better, and certainly doesn't enjoy being held accountable for anything he's done. That being said, he's not a bad person either. Whenever he sees someone's freedom being threatened or taken away, he would not hesitate to step in. Likewise, if someone is in grief mourning the loss of someone they admired, Barbatos wouldn't hesitate to help ease the pain. He doesn't search for people for help, but when presented with it, he would. Blissful ignorance might be an appropriate word here. If he doesn't see a problem, there is no problem. Other archons like Morax and Baal personally tend to their subjects, taking care of their nations and guiding them towards a better path. But Barbatos? He'd rather kick it back, pop open a bottle of wine, get drunk, and pass out. He'd rather travel and see the sights, playing his instruments and writing songs than do any of that. This is how Barbatos expresses his freedom. He doesn't like being shackled by responsibility, only shouldering the burden when it becomes a necessity. He doesn't stand for tyranny, slavery, or oppression. Quite the contrary, he is the god of freedom after all. But is this freedom worth it? Is it better to be tirelessly working on his duties in order to maintain the prosperity of a city? Isn't it a more productive approach to aid the Knights of Favonius directly by giving them instructions or guidelines? Wouldn't Mondstadt be a happier place if Barbatos were to roam the streets singing songs of freedom? Can you call Barbatos a bad guy for neglecting his duties in favor of indulging in sins like gluttony and sloth? Let's take the era of aristocracy for example. If he was around Mondstadt the entire time, the Lawrence clan wouldn't have made it far in oppressing the city. There was no way slaves from Natlan would have been brought here to work and fight in arenas for sport. The culture of the Luderharbastum festival wouldn't have been rigged to favor the heir of the Lawrence clan. Lives could have been saved and people's freedoms wouldn't have been under control. What excuse does Barbatos have for his indolence? Freedom as a curse. The inherent state of being free is to be able to act as one wishes, not being under the control of another, not subject to obligation or requirement. But can one really be free when one has power? The power to terraform land, the power to control the wind, the power to influence people, and the power to cause change. If you were to behold this power, are you responsible for taking care of everyone else? If you were the patron god of a region, are you not held accountable for the safety and living conditions of the people? Even if not realistically everybody, not even some in the main city. Sure, you can help out here and there, but how much can you really do? How much control do you have over the people of Mondstadt? How willing are they to listen to you? Would they agree to your changes, even if for the better? From the perspective of a normal person, should you rely on your god to help you? If so, to what end? Would you hold them responsible if lives were lost that could have been saved? Maybe for the quality of governing by the Knights of Favonius. At the very least, would you feel like they should be doing something, anything about the monsters camping around the outskirts of the city? Regardless of your answer for any of these, well, frankly loaded questions, the point still stands. To reference an adage, when you can do the things a god can, but you don't, and the bad things happen, they happen because of you. Throughout the main story of the prologue, and in Venti's character quest, nowhere is he truly punished for this behavior. Most of the people in Mondstadt don't despise their god, rather continue to worship him. The Church of Favonius is as popular as ever, and there are no signs of a fallen faith. Barbatos' absence within the region is a non-issue for the people. Why is this so? After all that he hasn't done, why exactly are people still so devout towards him? For one, the Knights of Favonius do a competent enough job that the people of Mondstadt don't have an issue with the way they run things. There hasn't been any political unrest since the fall of the aristocracy 1,600 years ago. The last time the city was attacked was recently in the timeline of the game, But that situation was resolved by the traveler from Outworld, the master of a winery, the acting Grand Master of the Knights of Favonius, and Barbatos himself. But the common folk of the city believed that it was handled by the knights and the traveler. The knights don't need a god to help them run the city, and all the people need is just the idea that a god is watching over them to feel at ease. Sure, the full or even partial aid of Barbatos could greatly improve the lives of everyone in Mondstadt, but that would go against the very philosophy of freedom that Barbatos had put forth all those years ago. The philosophy that people don't need a grand ruler to function. No god, no king, no political parties save for an organization of defenders. Barbatos is the embodiment of freedom, thus he shirks off the reins in favor of self-expression. In that sense, the people of Mondstadt are also free in deciding how they want to live their lives within the city. Both parties are free in that sense to make decisions independent of each other, yet living under the same philosophy of freedom. Barbatos gets to drink all he wants, to jest and relax, but still help people out whenever he sees a problem. Likewise, the knights get to govern the way they feel is best for the city, and the people get to freely pursue their ambition without being held under watchful scrutiny. They can worship Barbatos freely too, with there being no apparent consequence if you don't particularly agree with Barbatos' methods. You wouldn't be forced to worship him, or forced under a law to do something heinous. The people of Mondstadt are free to do as they please, as long as it doesn't disrupt the freedom of others. After all, what is freedom if demanded of you by a god? A curious case, the Knights of Favonius. I have some questions regarding the decision to establish the Knights. Barbatos learned that leading Mondstadt himself would result in another autocracy, which is exactly what Decorabian was leading. He also learned that having a ruling class of people is also a bad idea, as proven with the Lawrence clan. So why, I wonder, was he satisfied with leaving the governing power of the city to the military? Why did Barbatos believe that it was okay for the law-enforcing entity to be the same as the law-creation entity? It's honestly a miracle that in over 1,600 years, the Knights of Favonius remained totally uncorrupted. I mean, who's to say that a Grand Master would abuse their executive powers for their own selfish agenda? There isn't a council to regulate their actions. The closest rank would be the acting Grand Master, whose only role is to fill in for the Grand Master if they're unavailable. The executive power over a region is once again put into the hands of one person, just like Decorabian, just like Lord Lawrence. If earnest people like Jean weren't in charge, how much different of a place would Mondstadt be? I have no answers for this. The God of Freedom is by no means the most responsible or mature Archon in the story. However, his desire to pursue his own freedom, coinciding with Mondstadt's desire to govern itself, works perfectly well together to establish this concept of freedom that the city champions so often. Thus concludes our exploration into Barbatos' main theme in the narrative. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear them out. Until next time, travelers.